some weighty issues on the January Tynwald Order Paper, including the Highways Charter, swimming pools, Department of Infrastructure's plan, our island plan, and the economic strategy. On Perspective this week, I'm joined by political rottweiler Claire Christian MHK, deep-thinking Minister Chris Thomas, and Arbory Commissioner and Southern Pool member Kirrie Jenkins. Is the government's primary focus to churn out endless reports, or are we about to see real and meaningful change? So, in the interests of transparency, I should point out that when I'm not working for Manx Radio, I work for Arbory and Rushen Parish Commissioners, but I will endeavour to ensure that doesn't impact on my impartiality. So perhaps if we start with you, Claire, we're having a look through the Tynwald Order Paper. That's the primary focus of today's show. Anything particular that you think is going to trouble the Council of Ministers?
Well, just to say, I've been called some things before, but rottweiler is the first time, so I'm not sure what to say. Thank you for that. Obviously, we're looking at the question paper. There's some interesting questions that have come up. I've got 4 questions, one on work permits. That really is driven from my constituents. A lot of businessmen in my constituency have highlighted the issue of long lead times on work permits. Second question from me is performance reviews of the current CEOs. Have they happened? What was the result? Did they happen on time? I'm unaware of what the situation is for
and why particularly are you interested?
Well, I think because we the government really went out very strongly, and certainly this Chief Minister, about accountability. And obviously accountability starts from right at the top, so we really want to know if those performance reviews have been done and what's the result of that, what action is being taken if they have been done. Another question is on whether the Chief Minister believes there should be a time limit on new ministers being put into place. I think I worked out we've had interim ministers for 5.5 months of this 16.5 months of this administration. There's been 4 DFE ministers, including the Chief Minister, so taking a long time to choose somebody. Is that right? And I really want to kind of get into the Chief Minister's mind as to what and why.
It does make you wonder whether there's actually a need for a DFE minister if it can be done on a kind of a part-time basis in the way that seems to have happened.
I think that my own personal opinion on it is that maybe the Department for Enterprise as a title is redundant now. We've got an economic strategy. Should it be the Department of Economic Development? Should we have an economic development director, somebody who can really lead and promote the island properly, bring in the agencies into perhaps one, and really sort of make some big changes. But if you want to leave it as it is, then not work on it, kind of let things ride as they have been, then yeah, maybe it is a part-time job. But I think if you really want to take that economic strategy seriously and you want to create 5,000 jobs as the Chief Minister does, then I think you need to appoint somebody. Other question is basically on Noble's patients waiting for care home places. That was obviously raised by Manx Radio as being a concern when they interviewed Noble's Hospital because they're overcapacitated. So there's some really good questions. I'd also like to just point out question 16 by the Honourable Member for Rushen, Dr Hayward, is asking the Chair of the Officer of Fair Trading what steps the OFT has taken to deal with the billing problems experienced by customers of Island Energy. And that's a really big topic at the moment across social media, and certainly for any MHK who's dealing with their constituents. I have to say the level that I've been approached hasn't been huge, but I understand just looking at social media I can see a lot more. So I have reached out over this weekend to ask constituents and residents to contact me and give me some idea of the experiences. Back on the 5th of January, I did reach out to the CEO, Jo Cox, and gave her a couple of examples of issues that some constituents had. one whereby a customer had not received a bill, but had actually had the money taken out of their bank account. And Island Energy basically said that was due to a postal issue, and some customers hadn't received their bills because of that. There seems to be a sort of a general feeling from Island Energy that the problems are being resolved, but that doesn't seem to be the case. People have, just overnight I've had a lot of emails from people contacting me with a myriad of different types of problems with the bills, and this really has to be solved.
And Minister, I mean, I don't know, are you the rose between two thorns or the thorn between two roses? We'll see as the programme develops, but gas price, and that sounds like a rubbish infrastructure sort of thing.
Last time I was the fat controller, so both are looking better.
So I mean, is gas regulation, that isn't an infrastructure problem, is it?
Oh no, it is. The Department of Infrastructure is the sponsoring department, the main department in the Gas Regulation Act. So I've got two issues at the moment with gas regulation, having met a senior officer in DOI to lay this problem off on them from an officer point of view, and having met the director of Cura, the chief officer in Cura. The first one is that we are the sponsoring department and we still have functions. So, for instance, we can make regulations about the price level and the markup by landlords and things like that, but we haven't made regulations for whatever reason. I think I know the reason, which is we turned our mind away from it about 10, 12 years ago. And the second thing we can do is we can look to transfer our responsibility somewhere else where it will be better held. So that's our two angles. So there are profound problems with the Isle of Man Energy having other people's money and not being able to properly account for it at the moment. So I'd put that down as to Cura board and to Cura management. Even if you're not directly involved, you are, because that's pretty serious. And obviously the Office of Fair Trading's got huge responsibilities because they're responsible for customer rights and customer protection, and that's vital.
And then I suppose the obvious highlight for you must be, presumably, the Department of Infrastructure's departmental plan, which is down at item 5 on the order paper. Is anything particular that stands out from that plan, other than the Minister's forward, that you think we should be taking note of?
Well, the plan was held back by various people through the last few months because we were hoping that the island plan and the economic strategy would be further ahead and we could take them into account, because there still are contradictions between the climate change action plan, the island plan and the economic strategy, and there still will be when we take the departmental plan forward, because the island plan revision only comes after the departmental plan. So in the end, our departmental plan was written several months ago, and the economic strategy is better from infrastructure's point of view, and we've taken ownership of infrastructure services through what we provide for service providers for a larger population. So, we talk about if there is a population of 100,000 by 2037, let's make sure the infrastructure can cope. And as we get there, we've got to have adequate infrastructure along the way. And so the departmental plan, all we're asking Tynwald to do is to receive it. There are 5 responsibilities for us inside the island plan, which I can go through, but I wouldn't actually think receiving the departmental plan is the most important item on the order paper, but very pleased to talk about all the very important things that the Department of Infrastructure is doing.
And it seems that the department is a great success. Every box that there is seems to have a green line alongside it saying you're meeting your required objective. I think there's 2 or 3 exceptions, but
no, just one exception. We've just put orange or yellow against the Liverpool ferry terminal because that's at risk, because it's a very difficult project, complex project, both in terms of delivery time and also the budget. It's not over the budget. It's not necessarily going to be late, but it's at risk. So that's the only thing we put down at orange, and everything else we are at green in terms of meeting our island plan and departmental plan objectives. However, I've got to say that's because this current government wasn't very keen on the Department of Infrastructure 18 months ago, and everything else was given to somebody else when it probably should have been given to the Department of Infrastructure. And that's why I had the offer of the Department for Enterprise and turned it down, because the island plan is not going to deliver if infrastructure doesn't get the airport right, the sea terminal right, the ferry services, the air services, the bus services, the public estate, the roads, and all the school buildings, the hospital buildings, all of those things that are in the responsibility of infrastructure. And we're also not going to meet the climate change targets unless the Department of Infrastructure leads the way on dealing with waste strategy, with housing strategy, with transport strategy, with building strategy. So it's absolutely vital to get those things right. And all we have is 4 leading objectives in the Island Plan, and we're on schedule for all of those. That's why it's green.
Just before I move on to Kirri, then Claire, you had a point.
Yeah, I mean we can get into the nitty gritty of the infrastructure plan, but I just want to, and it's quite good that Chris is here, just to raise that basically one of their KPIs is to increase the number of people travelling on a bus. But this isn't even clear in the plan. How does that mean more buses? Does that mean more? How are they going to achieve that? I'm really nervous about the vision of the bus strategy. There was a bus strategy for transport connectivity and accessibility in 2021. I don't know how that's developed. It's not really talked about, and I'm very, very interested to see that. Chris knows how I feel about social housing infrastructure needs as well. I don't think we're building enough social housing. I agree that we do need the infrastructure plan first of all. But we need to have some kind of forecast. We're going into a budget in February, and this infrastructure needs assessment. Chris, you might have a more of a clearer idea being in Comyn when that's actually coming through, but if we don't have a plan, if we're going to raise thresholds for social housing, we don't have a plan for new houses. There's more and more people are absolutely needing more and more normal, and I say that in a really bizarre way. What does mean normal? But somebody who's on a middle range salary, not people who are on the breadline, need to be in social housing. It shouldn't be the last resort for people anyway. We should be able to provide the social housing. Now, I know we have a higher number of social housing compared to Jersey and Guernsey, but that doesn't matter. We are doing things differently and should do things what's right for the Isle of Man. So I want to see, and I would have really liked to have seen in the infrastructure plan, at least some kind of report or research into actually what we're going to be building, and how. What's the knock-on effect of the raised threshold that's possibly coming through with Jason Morehouse's motion?
Kirrie Jenkins, I suppose you may be surprised to note that there's nothing in the department plan, as far as I could see. Maybe I missed it in relation to local government reform. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It is surprising, isn't it? It's been talked about for a long time, and the minister has been on a sort of bit of a roadshow with all the local authorities. Perhaps Chris is the person to answer why it's not on the agenda.
Well, in actual fact, I'd say one of the 4 identified Island Plan objectives for the department is actually to do with local authority transition, practical local authority transition, because the Highways Maintenance Charter, which is a much more substantial item itself, is on the Tynwald Order Paper next week, because that's about, in 2014-15, there was a delegation from Department of Infrastructure to each of the local authorities for, maintaining gullies, hedges, footpaths in the less strategic routes, and that sort of thing. And what we've done is we've been out on a roadshow around the regions talking about setting standards and then working with local authorities to find out what standards should be set, how we should work together on keeping those standards, if they're the right standards, and if we do need to set standards, and most importantly, who's going to pay for keeping those standards. So that's a practical element of local authority reform. We also went out to local authorities in 2 other capacities over the last 3 or 4 months, one of which was housing, and so to address straight away Claire's point, we are talking about how we're going to raise the thresholds, because the largest housing providers are not the government. It's housing providers who are also local authorities. So that's been discussed. And
for those who don't understand local authority or public sector housing, what do you mean by raising the
So in other words, at the moment we have access and eligibility criteria for getting onto the public housing waiting list. We are going to increase those criteria in April, May, June.
And increasing the criteria basically means it's going to be easier for
more people
for
are eligible because of their household income circumstances and other circumstances. So that's but that has to be done under a national policy, but in consultation with local authorities. So we haven't been to Arbory and Rushen so much because I think Rushen has 4 houses from memory, and then it's not exactly a huge player in that market, but we have with the Ramsey and the Peel and the like. And then the third area is buses, because the bus division has been round to have meetings with all the local authorities about bus routes when they were invited. So in other words, you don't get anywhere with local authority reform if you have it as your objective, because it's just meaningless. What we're trying to do is we're trying to focus on the actual functions and how we can deliver better the functions that people want inside the local areas with appropriate management. That's why the swimming pool debate is going to be so important in Tynwald this January, because that's about this very question: do we need a swimming pool in the south? Who's going to pay for it, and the like?
Well, I was asking you to clarify some of the civil service speak there, and Ruth has just texted in to say, "What is a KPR? I wish politicians would use real speech." KPI, I think it was that you said.
And I wouldn't have used KPI.
I use KPI. Apologies, but yes, it's
and it's a key performance indicator,
exactly.
And I'm not entirely sure what that means. It's basically a measure of how successful or otherwise the department is.
So it was basically to say that so to say how that the DOI would improve. Or it would be a measure of how they've improved, and that's basically saying the number of people travelling by bus, and yeah, of course that's a good indicator to say that their services are improving. But it's just how are they going to do that? And certainly when you've got a chief minister who's renowned for his SAVE programme, I hardly think he's going to be giving extra budgets here and there for transport, but we'll see. Just on the note about which I spoke about before about social housing, we've got 700 people or so on the waiting list currently for social housing across the island. And really, I don't even think that that's a true reflection, because it's really renowned that the length of time for to get to be able to get a house on social housing, it could be 2 years down the line if you're somebody who doesn't qualify for extra points, and because it's based on points. And so really that 700 could be a lot more people who are paying private but actually really could do with and really would like to go onto that waiting list. So if we've got that right now, we're looking at raising the thresholds. More people are going to become eligible. It really concerns me that there's not enough social housing, and that they're just the numbers now. So what is it going to end up?
Kirri, you've been sitting very quietly in the corner there. What about this highways charter then? I mean, are the local authorities failing in their duties here, or do you think there's more that local authorities should be doing, or is it about right?
Well, there's been a lot of grey areas, as you know, Phil, and there's been a loss of corporate knowledge across the DOI, insufficient inventory records, and I think maintenance has suffered as a result. I know that Minister Thomas is pushing in the right direction and addressing these shortcomings. The local authorities are going to shortly be reviewing the service level agreements that the DOI have provided. And inevitably there's going to be some practicalities to overcome, particularly I think for rural parishes like Arbory and Rushen. We don't retain a full-time manual workforce, for instance.
And in essence, it's Chris Robertshaw's thing, isn't it? This smaller, smarter government. This is what many of the rural authorities are. I mean, maybe not quite how Chris Robertshaw envisaged, but effectively most of the rural authorities commission services from private companies to come in and deliver.
You're right, Phil. And for example, Arbory and Rushen have collaborated recently with the DOI on maintenance of the Ballaclawy and Ballaclferrick roads, and the feedback has been very positive. Collaboration rather than confrontation is definitely the better solution for all concerned. I mean, we should be working together to exercise the functions and get the best and most efficient, value for money. I think central government is increasing the workload of the local authorities, and in some cases, as we come to expect, increasing the bureaucracy. So I think there's still some negotiating to be done before we strike the right balance to ensure that ratepayers, for example, aren't paying additional costs for something that we've already paid for through general taxation.
And in terms of that, you mentioned about bureaucracy. Is it not fair to say that many of the rural authorities effectively ignore bureaucracy and perhaps don't do as much as they ought to do in terms of record keeping, in terms of adequate monitoring of what goes on in the parishes?
I couldn't say, Phil. I mean, you're our clerk, so we've got to be
trying to
careful
be
what
neutral.
I'm trying to. Look, I think there's been different standards across different local authorities. I know we actively took part in the feedback to do with the public rights of way, and anybody reading that report would see that there's definitely different standards. Arbory and Rushen have always stepped up to the plate and done their bit, I think, and so many other parishes have done that. But we need to stop this sort of petty squabbling over salt bins and things like that, which at the end of the day we're trying to provide public services for public good, aren't we? So coming to sort of like clearing those grey areas and saying who's responsible for what is definitely going to help, because there's definitely been some anomalies where the DOI have thought the local authorities are doing one thing and we've thought it was the DOI's responsibility.
And wouldn't it be more efficient to just have a department for local government that delivers these services across the whole of the island? Surely we no longer need, how many is it now? Is it 22 local authories? Or
I think it's fewer than that
is
now.
Is it?
Arbory and Rushen, I think it's down to 20 from memory. But,
Right, okay. So do we need, isn't the whole concept of local authorities, is that not a thing of the past now?
But are we adding an extra layer of bureaucracy? The local authorities in the main, they're volunteers, the commissioners aren't paid, they give up their time for free. You could say that you've got economies of scale if you join together, but on the other hand, you've also got monopoly situation then over services. So I think these debates are all something that need to happen, and I'm sure Chris is the man to do it.
Well, Minister, just before we go to the break then, do you think large central government is going to be more effective than small rural authorities?
No, we've got to get beyond that sort of level. We've got to be really practical. Collaboration is exactly the right way to go. We've got to make sure that we don't bring in armies of clipboard carrying inspectors moving around. It's got to be practical. So, for instance, some of the ambiguities that Kirri is referring to would be, defining exactly how you do a hedge, how high you do a hedge, and what you do with the stuff that you take away. Because it turned out in the meetings that's ambiguous. Inventories of the gullies and the pavements and things is really important. So we've got to now think about how we can make sure that we record in one place, even if it's just to protect ourselves in insurance claims, of what work's been done and how we've dealt with potholes and how we've dealt with curbs. In terms of the machinery, it's all well and good relying on the local contractor, but if you can't go high enough up a hedge or you can't get deep enough into the gully, it's not the same quality if you have the proper equipment. So we've got to make sure that the equipment is available to the right people at the right time, at the right place, at the right cost. And then when it comes to enforcement, it's hard to imagine parking and things like that being enforced about unless you have a person on the ground to help with it. There are ways with AMPR and drive past and taking pictures, but that's a bit like Big Brother does. Is the Isle of Man ready as yet for having just London-style enforcement notices sent from cars driving around? So these are very practical things that we've got to deal with. We've got to get beyond, that this person's more efficient than that person's more efficient. We've got to collaborate to get to a better situation to keep our footpaths and our hedges and our countryside and our towns as good as they can be for as cheap as possible.
So you heard it first on Perspective. That's the Minister's statement on the Highways Maintenance Charter. So welcome back to Perspective, and we're joined in the studio by Claire Christian MHK, Chris Thomas MHK, and Kirrie Jenkins, who is a Arbory Commissioner but also a member of the Southern Swimming Pool Board, and we'll hear a little bit more about the pool shortly. But what does surprise me is that our island plan, which is item 6, which is supposedly government's big sort of policy statement. That doesn't seem to have reached anyone's list of top priorities for or areas of interest in relation to the Tynwald Order Paper. It's a year into this administration, so it's kind of in line with previous governments. That it takes about a year to come up with a plan. So you've only got 4 years left to deliver. Does nobody? Is this old news now? Is that the problem with this? Do you think? Anybody? Claire?
Yeah, let's talk about the Island Plan. I think it's great. Obviously, what's happening is they've blended in this economic strategy, and the economic strategy has obviously been already debated. So it's really, how does that work in terms of what their overall strategy is? I can't see it being something that somebody is not going to vote for. I can't see that there's going to be much kickback, but I mean, from my perspective, as I've said earlier, there's a real emphasis on this Department of Enterprise. What is it meant to be? They're obviously meant to be leading this economic strategy, and it would really concern me right now that there doesn't seem to be somebody full-time on that. We really need somebody to kind of like look at the local market, the island, to have a really sort of a strategic focus, study market trends, identify potential threats, opportunities, focus on developing and strengthening the local economy and create, obviously, these new jobs. They've got to look at strengthening our local economy. They've obviously got some really big concerns with that right now. There doesn't seem to be anybody really taking control of that, and that really does concern me.
I mean, we began this journey in terms of the economic strategy with bold statements and a big splash, but
it seems to be
there doesn't feel as though there's much by way of that big ticket items coming forward, demonstrating a clear move forward.
From my perspective, I tell you what's really interesting, Phil. So I remember, obviously, going back to the beginning of this administration and the workshops and the emphasis on the Island Plan, and we were all brought in, and we were, it was a real collaboration. It certainly feels that way. I expected the beginning of September just gone. I expected there to be a sort of reignition of that coming from the Council of Ministers, and it doesn't feel that way. But at some point, obviously, the departments have to take responsibility, and they have to take responsibility, and we can't have our hands held the whole time by the Chief Minister. We've actually got to go out there and actually do something and make things happen now. So they've set it. They've said this is what our strategy is. The Isle of Man, Tynwald has approved that. Now we've actually got to deliver, and that's the message that we should be getting from the Council of Ministers. This is what we've delivered. This is how much we've achieved in this first year, and I'd like to see more of that, Phil. I'd like to see more communication about what each department is doing. I know, certainly from my perspective of being in the department for education, that's really important to say. We're working on the AEN code. We're working on, obviously, the situation with the teacher strike has been a big focus for the department. So it's really important we get that message out. But I don't hear it as much as I would like to hear it, is what I'm saying.
So,
and I think you might feel the same.
Kirri, I mean, are you inspired and overwhelmed by all this activity that's coming out of government, or are you waiting to?
Well, one of the points that I looked at the economic strategy, and in my youth I travelled, I worked abroad, and so I feel that I've got a sort of rounded view of this, and without an influx of new talent to replace our ageing workforce, the island is going to be left with a low economic output. Now, capturing mobile youth is the major challenge, and countries that are politically stable and, some would say, naturally resistant to climate change are going to fare better. So a large proportion of our youth today, they want to own their own business, they want entrepreneurial opportunities, high-speed internet, financial incentives, and they will all attract young to rural communities, like our parish. There's a lot of people work from home these days, and we're not well serviced with internet in our areas, particularly you, Phil. I know.
I think it's a blessing not being
possibly.
able to. The internet's down, so
but,
I could get.
The island is really well placed to take advantage of this new green and blue economy, and what's needed is a clear route map to facilitate migration in a way that best meets our community. And I haven't seen anything really imaginative or inventive which makes our offering stand out from any other locations suffering from similar problems.
Yeah, I agree. We need definitely more incentives for business and more incentives for individuals as well. And I'm with you, Kirri, on this. I think it's important our Manx residents do go off island, and I think it's important they do gain experience, but it's attracting them back to become to feed back into the island, and how do we keep and maintain that communication and that link with them is really, really important. I know I went off island for 20 years. You're probably thinking, wish I'd stayed off island, but it during that time I didn't once think, I'd like to kind of head back and there's opportunities there. It was only through personal experience because of family, and I didn't think those same opportunities would exist on the island. So we really need to start screaming it from the rooftops what you can do, but there's worryingly not enough emphasis on incentives and support, and we're going to be looking at taxation, and that's all coming up, Chris, isn't it, with in Treasury, so that's going to be really interesting as to what's going to happen with corporation tax going forward, and are we going to stand out, or are we going to blend in with our crown dependencies?
And hopefully we'll find out all about that in February when Budget Day comes along. One thing that interests me, Minister, is part 2 of the item 6, which refers to the island plan, and it says that Tynwald notes that as a living document, our island plan will be updated over the course of the administration. How does that updating happen? Because you've gone to the trouble of asking the public what they think. You've gone to the trouble of asking Tynwald members on several occasions what they think about the island plan, and finally it looks as though we're going to get a vote on this. But then the plan can be updated at some point, possibly even the day after the vote. It's not clear to me how that update happens.
Well, things change, so that's one reason to update, but also it's not perfect still. So, for instance, this plan, as you say, was discussed at a conference. I think it's government's plan to have a slightly smaller scale in the evening, in part, conference at the same time as this year, next year, for the island plan. And I know also now I want to work with housing providers, local authorities, alongside that, to have a local authority, government spirit of collaboration plan for practical things like highways and bus routes and housing and the like, which again we'll do in the summer. So that's another reason to input into this plan. And finally, each year the departments have got to come along with a departmental plan for debate inside Tynwald. That's clear in the island plan, and as I've hinted at earlier on, as soon as our departmental plan is received, it'll start changing, because our departmental plan will then have to be changed in light of the island plan. That's the next item on the Tynwald Order Paper. We need to have some collaboration, perhaps even squabbles with Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture about climate change and some of their policies, because there are contradictions between how we deal with transport and waste and housing that need to be ironed out. We need to have those debates. That's another cause. So in other words, it's not perfect as yet, and in any case, even if it was perfect, things change. So that's the reason why it has to be updated all of the time.
Kirri?
Going back to your department plan, Chris, one point of particular interest to local authorities, of course, is the report on the implementation of the 2018 waste strategy. Now, you take Arbory and Rushen as an example. Last year, over 63p in every pound was attributable to what we call sustainability and waste. So that's refuse disposal, refuse collection, civic amenity site, wheelie bins, etc. Mm-hmm. And you've just increased, the fees for that, which is only going to add to this burden. Mm-hmm. An overall waste strategy, according to your department plan, we're looking at, 2025, is it?
Yeah. So I completely agree, because I got the figures here, and for instance the civic amenity site and the waste contributions from local authorities absolutely dwarf the swimming pool contributions, which we're going to talk about in a moment. There's a huge amount, but for our department the largest part of some of our divisions is the payments for the energy for waste plant up in Braddon. We've got to have better coordination for waste management. Unfortunately, what's called the decarbonisation scenarios haven't as yet been produced by the climate change team, but there is a procurement ongoing such that they will come. There is a centralised climate change transformation team that's going to have an officer for DOI to help us with transport strategy and waste strategy, but that person is not yet in place. But the recruitment is live at the moment. And as I've said to you, you've had highways maintenance, you've had buses, you've had housing. Watch that space for waste strategy, because I want to extend the collaboration into this area, because it's so important that we get it right. Essentially, if you come from London, if you come from Liverpool, if you come from Germany, and you impose what you were doing there as best practice in the Isle of Man, it's not going to work, because there are profound differences. Our island demography is different, our island nature is different. The fact that we have trans-frontier shipment regulations, the fact that we have costs involved to get to uses, means that we're going to have to reduce, reuse, recycle, incinerate, transship in a different way. And I want to have that debate. And we only have 2 members of staff in Department of Infrastructure and Waste Strategy. That's a problem for us, but we do need to use the expertise elsewhere up at the Energy for Waste plant in the local authorities to have a better waste strategy. And our 10-point plan for waste strategy is very important to me.
And it is fair to say that, I know from my previous knowledge of DOI that you don't have a huge amount of staff, particularly in relation to local government, for example, and indeed waste.
Well, 2 local government, 2 waste, only a few more in policy for housing. So we're a tiny staff, but you've got a minister now, like we had when we were working together back in 2014-16, who was really going to focus on this from a practical point of view, to make practical changes that make sense and of good value.
And one of the other items, which probably won't attract as much interest from many of the listening public, but certainly has attracted some level of concern, particularly from the northern and western pools, is this plan, or the report that's been produced into regional pool strategy, which seems to be suggesting that your hard-pressed staff need to take over the running of swimming pools as well. Is that something that the Southern Pool welcomes, Kirri? It
is actually. The board has written to all the MHKs and MLCs asking them to support this motion. It's definitely a step in the right direction for Southern. It's a good factual report. It didn't sugarcoat it. David McKendry from Knight Cabinet and Page was very knowledgeable. The financial difficulties that Southern have been experiencing are certainly not something that's appeared overnight. The local authority contribution rate, for example, has stayed at 2.5p since inception of the pool, which is 1978, 79.
But the Western Pool and the Northern Pool, and many people who ring up Manx Radio's Man Line say, well, it's just poorly managed. The pool, the West and the North seem to manage okay. So why are we going down this route of a regionalised pool strategy when it just appears to be the Southern Pool that can't manage its own affairs?
Well, when the pool was first established, we were in a different age. The generous pension scheme would be unthinkable today. The lifespan of the pool was estimated 40 to 45 years. We're at that stage. Some of the decisions made by past boards were not the best. In hindsight, it's a wonderful thing. It's very easy to look back now, point the finger. A lot harder to make decisions at the time with hindsight. It should be remembered that all board members are volunteers, and it is a considerable amount of time being given up to looking at what's gone wrong at Southern Pool. A lot of professional time being given up for free. For me personally, I think I was disappointed to see that successive governments appear to have recognised that there were shortcomings in the funding model, but did nothing about it. With the exception of Minister Edge and her officers, they've they've really been supportive and stepped up to us once we lifted up the carpet, so to speak. The pool technically was insolvent before this board took over, and I say technically because the department desk covers any deficiencies to a degree, but it's been an extremely challenging financial period, and we've had to make very difficult decisions to limit the financial exposure and drop some of the costly business elements.
And Claire Christian, I mean, when the Southern Pool was developed, most MHKs were part-timers. You know, they'd only be turning up maybe 2 or 3 days a week to do their MHK. Well, you could say that and name names if you like. Is this part of the problem? Maybe that we're expecting too much now of local authorities because everything else has moved on, and there's very few MHKs that could reasonably put their hand on the heart and say this is a part-time job. There's so much that you have to read, so much that you've got to know, and we're largely expecting in terms of regional pools, but maybe also in other areas with regards to local authorities, expecting volunteers to know and read all this vast amount of information.
Yeah, I think just going back to one point, I'll answer that, but just to sort of say in support of the Southern Pool, this is a strategy that's really derived just from struggles in the south. Minister Thomas pointed out the Isle of Man Sport and Recreation Strategy 2002-2012, brought by the then Tourism and Sport Department, and that this vision of regional hubs was certainly described back then and was needed back then, and it's just been kicked down the road by governments of the past. And I'm really supportive of this, obviously the motion that's coming through, being brought through by Desk, because I think it's a really, again, we talk about collaboration, and it's really important that we actually collaborate with all these stakeholders, and we build these hubs that's right for the communities. And it comes back to the island plan, and and it means that we're really sort of developing something that's not just suddenly been brought up through this report. But back to the point about volunteers and to the point of MHKs working full time, being paid a salary. I think yes, we do have to recognise that councillors and commissioners or board members do these this job voluntarily. It is a huge amount of work, and whether you're doing that role or whether you're doing your MHK role, you'll probably have your full-time job at the same time, or you've got a business, or you're working in other areas. But for me, every MHK I would have thought will tell you that this isn't a 9-to-5 job. This is more a 24/7, 7 days a week. But I'm the kind of person that likes that, Phil. I've always liked that. I've always enjoyed that flexibility of being able to switch on and off, but majoritively on. But certainly from a perspective of Kirri, I agree. It is difficult. We do put a lot on them. So bringing it back into this concept of bringing it back, the pools into Desk, is something that needs to be explored and hopefully not kicked down the road again, and actually something done as this time.
Kirri?
Well, if you look back at the structure for the transfer of functions of the regional pools, this was written into the Local Government Act in 2006, so 17 years ago and counting. I've said that the Southern Pool is fully supportive of this motion. It was evident when we were forensically examining the accounts and the operations that there's definite cost savings to be had across the pools, and there's duplications of functions in common. There's opportunities there to improve things operationally, and importantly to improve the governance. And whilst the Night Cabinet Page report goes into these at high level, we've looked and examined them at the sort of the minute bottom line. And, whilst it's important to note that Southern is the oldest pool and therefore ran into the difficulties first. It's so important that we have contingency planning in place for Northern and Western, and this has got to be put into long-term planning.
Because, of course, the other thing to remember about the Southern Pool, it was designed and built at a time when it was felt that government was always going to be there to support the pool, and it didn't have a large cafe that was designed to supplement the income of the pool. Chris Thomas, are you as council ministers generally content to take over the regional pools? I mean, the implications of potentially introducing a regional leisure rate, are those all accepted by council ministers now?
Well, no. Government agreed to put this on the order paper, so it agrees this motion. Otherwise, it wouldn't have asked one of its members to move it. But that doesn't imply a regional all-island leisure rate or even a regional leisure rate. That's still to be done. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that what the motion says is that DESC, Department of Education, Sport and Culture, and the Department of Infrastructure will undertake a piece of work to cost a new long-term strategic plan, which would transfer, not which will transfer. We have to see that in the context of the crisis that's in the Southern Swimming Pool, and it's absolutely important that the Southern Swimming Pool stays open and that we deal with the issues that are identified in the report. But we've also got to acknowledge that there are other players in this. In the West, they made the point that they had said they hadn't seen this motion on the report. I just want to say that they first received it when the public received it on the 23rd of December, because I sent it to them on the 23rd of December, and they, as I understand it, the Western Swimming Pool Board did actually meet with the consultants back in September, because that's all written up in the report. I also think the Northern Swimming Pool Board has made a really good point, which is that the governance and the actual practical aspects of maintenance haven't worked in the last 7 or 8 years. I think something went wrong with the transfer of functions in 2014 and 2017, and I'm really surprised to see how somehow we lost the normal local government processes from this process, and it became just a budget function and a maintenance function of the Department of Education. We need to look at that. So we've got so much to do, and I hope we can collaborate, work together. I think I can end it with some words from Sir Miles Walker back in 2000, when the swimming pool orders were put together and the boards were created. Miles Walker said, "If the price of local management is a 2.5 pence rate," and I'm sure he would have said, or a 6 pence rate or a larger rate, rather than having centralised management, then I think it is a cost worth paying. And so we've got to get the balance between the centralised and the management right. But we also have to remember that Derby is paying £1,469 into the Northern Swimming Pool, whereas government's paying nearly £2 million. So we've also got to get the balance right in terms of that sort of perspective. We've got lots of work to do.
And of course, the regional boards would also point to the fact that Douglas, Braddon and Onken and parts of Lonnon maybe don't actually pay anything towards the pool.
Alec Downey, I'm sure, hope he's listening, he said back in 2000, he pointed that out and basically explained that the Eastern authorities didn't currently pay back in 2000 into this arrangement.
And to be fair, Douglas granted
because they gave the land, and it was all to do with summer land, and before that was all to do with
and
the Henry Bloom Noble Trust.
Douglas, but what about Onken and Garth and Braddon?
And the reality is, Braddon has got a huge rateable value inside Braddon now. I was shocked to learn recently that it's always been the case that the commercial rates are a huge percentage of Braddon's bill, but Braddon now has a larger commercial rateable value inside it than Douglas does, which to me is absolutely surprising. We know business has been going out there, but anyhow, Braddon, Onken, Douglas, Garth are huge compared to some of the contributions made into these boards and committees. So I do think that if I can possibly do it, without frightening them, we've got to have a complete look at how we provide leisure facilities, and perhaps even beyond into cultural facilities and art facilities. But nothing is determined. We're looking at this with an open heart and open mind to make sure we get the best value for ratepayers' funds, for taxpayers' funds, and remembering that people who use sports facilities and arts facilities and cultural facilities have got to pay as well.
Well, sadly, Kirrie Jenkins Claire Christian and Chris Thomas, that's who you've been listening to. We've been talking about the Tynwald Order paper, and we've just about run out of time on the programme, so thank you all for your contributions.
Bye-bye.